Just like to welcome everybody to our program today as we're speaking with Stanley Carlson-Thies, who's from the Washington, D.C. area. And Stanley and his close colleague, Stephen Monsma, has written a book, Free to Serve. And Stanley, you want to just lift up that book there, Free to Serve? And we're so thankful that you could be with us today. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance and what work you're involved with.
Yeah, sure, Barry. I wanted to just start out by acknowledging my University of Toronto PhD degree, and
Well, that's great for our Canadian listeners.
yeah. So it's actually a wonderful opportunity to see a different country kind of close up and different religious freedom traditions and everything else. But I'm a U.S. citizen and worked mainly in the United States. Um, as I have worked in U.S. politics over the years, it's just become clearer and clearer that there is this kind of a bit of a contrast and even conflict that's
Mm,
grown between public policy and then faith organizations that do all kinds of services to the public, religious charities,
mm,
colleges, and so on. And as I worked at that, and over the years in Washington, kind of gathered an informal discussion group, it just became um, I thought it became clear that there needed to be some way to draw people together, draw organizations together formally across different religious boundaries and across different services to kind of think together about what's common to the faith organizations and what's affecting all of them in federal policy, U.S. federal policy, and then how might they advocate better back to the government for better policy. And so in 2008, I started the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, wanted to stress institutional for these faith organizations and not just kind of the individual religious freedom, which is
right.
also important, but it's not the only important thing.
Well, and it seems to me that in recent times there's been a number of important cases that have dealt with the institutional religious freedom that it seems, at least from those of us here on the Canadian side of the border, looking down south, we've seen a number of interesting cases that's made their way up to this U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes, one of them had to do with religious student clubs on public colleges and university campuses, and actually that one turned out poorly. It was a Christian legal group for Christian law students, and they wanted to be recognized like other student groups on the University of California Law School campus, and because they are a religious group, they have certain religious beliefs and standards for leadership, and the law school said that's discriminatory. You have to
Mm.
get rid of those criteria or you will have to be derecognized. And unfortunately, the United States Supreme Court upheld that decision, and that's kind of now led to a number of student groups being derecognized on different campuses.
Now, that was a close vote on the
Yeah,
court,
it
right? Was
was.
that
Yeah,
5-4?
it was 5-4. And so possibly if the facts were just a little bit different. In fact, the law school said that it required every student group to be open to anybody who wanted to be their leader. And so they couldn't,
Hmm.
single out just religious groups and give them protected space or something like that. Um, whatever the argument, it just seems very bizarre to think that a club of whatever kind or any kind of organization shouldn't be able to select its leaders based on some criteria that have to do with what the club is all about. And in fact, Barry, there's another case which was 9-0 unanimous U.S. Supreme Court, which was also about religious leadership. And in that case, called Hosanna Tabor, it was
Mm.
a Lutheran church-related school and had a teacher who was let go and she sued under employment discrimination law. And the Supreme Court said, well, she was actually not just an ordinary employee, but kind of a ministerial employee because she had certain religious duties, was kind of trained especially to carry those out, even though she was a math teacher. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, well, going all the way back to the Magna Carta and all these disputes in England, it's a firm principle in our law, our legal principles, that religious organizations have the essentially complete freedom to select their leaders based on whatever they think the reason is. And employment law, non discrimination law can't stand in the way of that. So, in the case of this church school and its ministerial teacher, the Supreme Court unanimously said they can just pick whoever they want. In the case of the student club at a public university, they were told, even fairly minimal distinctions on picking leaders, that that was illegal.
Okay, now is it possible that the differences in those results is because there's an understanding of private and public, that the public or that the university is in the public realm, the church is considered a private realm, and so we allow greater freedom for the church, but we don't allow as much freedom for the public university.
Yeah,
Is that part of what's going
yeah,
on
that
here?
that could be part of it. I think I don't know if I distinguish between public and private quite like that. I think maybe the
Okay.
distinctions between the one was a church and then a church school, and so because the First Amendment definitely protects religious exercise and therefore
Mhm.
religious institutions. So a church is seen as kind of a core religious institution. Clergy-like positions would be core, and so those have to be maximally protected almost against any restriction. But the club is not the church. Maybe it has some analogy. It wants to be religious. It has religious standards, but it's not the church. And so I think the tendency is to just not protect it in the same way. And in fact, that's one of the arguments we take on in this book, because in fact, people of faith, they don't just live out their faith in like a church institution. It's not just when they're
Mm.
worshiping, when they
Mhm.
are running a church or church related school, that they believe they're carrying out their religion. They're supposed to be faithful in all of life. And one way they try to be faithful in all of life actually is to form uh, institutions like clubs and charities and so on to carry out those
Right.
beliefs. And so to kind of say, well, protect the church, but not that other kind of thing that also sees itself as an outgrowth of the faith, we think just kind of helps to cut a significant part of the actual religion, to leave it unprotected in our society in a way that's really harmful to people of faith and the expression of faith in life. If you think about it, just thinking about the Christian tradition, Jesus said there are two great commandments. One of them is to love God with all your heart, and you could say that's kind of the worship. The other is to love your
Hmm.
neighbor as yourself. That was the second great commandment. So loving your neighbor as yourself in a way that God calls you to, that's just as much a religious duty as worship. And so if the government's protecting religious freedom, it's got to protect both of those, not just one.
And that it strikes to me that that is a fundamental understanding of religion that we seem to have lost right now in our society. Certainly here in Canada as well. I mean, we've been uh, dealing with the Trinity Western case, where again, the question is asked, well, why on earth do you evangelicals want to have a law school? I mean, law school has nothing to do with your religion.
Yeah. Well,
And it's, okay, go ahead.
Well, uh, of course, that's a point of view on what
Yeah.
religion is. And so religious people are saying back, no, religion actually is something that's relevant for law school. And in fact, we'll show you what that is like. And it's in showing what it's like, including having certain community standards about how the people who have that view of law and of faith and life want to live together, people find that offensive. And so they actually do see that these views have some consequences for law and for law schools. They don't like the consequences, and then therefore they don't want to give freedom for it. But I think basically here we have different views of life. Is life basically a secular kind of thing, and then maybe some people go off and worship a little bit, or do people have other animating principles that they believe really should shape everything they do? And that's what they think, and it should come to reflection. And so they're saying back to that secular view, that's not accurate. You're not taking us seriously. These things really are important from us. And look at all these things that we create or try to create, like a law school and religious charities. And it's not just we go on Sunday and worship, or the Sabbath or Saturday, but we also gather together on Monday in certain kinds of schools that teach things a little differently. Or we also go to the soup kitchen and we want to serve there because God calls us to do that. And for somebody to come along and say, no, that's just all not really anything, when it clearly is something, shows a kind of a clash of views. And different views are supposed to be protected after all. And so we just kind of appeal back and say, that's your view, but here's our view, and let us live it out.
Okay, great. Well, we'll end it right here for now, but stay tuned because we're going to be coming back and discuss his book, Free to Serve.